Okay, good morning. We are in the Alter B'Shulchan Aruch, Taf Ayin Beis, chapter 472. We're continuing with the laws of the 4 cups of wine. And we began, we began yesterday discussing the kind of wine to be used. And we learned essentially that it doesn't really matter whether you use white although ordinarily for Kiddush, it doesn't really matter whether you use white or red. It all depends on which one's better. Even though there's a view that says red is better, nonetheless, for the 4 cups of wine, red should be used, following the view that says red is always better. That's because there's an association with blood. And then he threw in a little thing about be careful with blood libels. So Chav Zayin.
What was that guy you mentioned yesterday?
Moshe Bayless is the last. Menachem Bayless, not Moshe Bayless. Menachem Bayless, the last blood libel.
Even on Kiddush, if you're drinking a Kiddush and white wine, they say to spill a little red into it.
Well, it's because he mentioned that the Chabad minhag that the Rebbeim would always use red wine. But I don't know if there's any halachic Okay, Chav Zayin. Kol hayenis hakshedim l'kiddush, all wine that is kosher for Kiddush, b'shar yomim tovim v'shabbosos, on all other holidays and Shabbatot, kshedim are suitable. La'arba koises for the 4 cups of wine. Yeah.
What's the point in pointing that out?
Well, he doesn't want to review all the laws again of what is considered valid wine for Kiddush. So he says, go to the laws of Kiddush. You'll see there all that's valid there is valid here too.
Okay. Perfect.
Basically. And he's going to give us some examples in a minute. So let's look at footnote 113. We're going to look at some of the footnotes here because there's some expansive.
Is all the wine that we drink during the year kosher with Pesach?
For the most part, wine is kosher with Pesach because wine is grapes. There's no wheat there.
Mm-hmm.
They just they may not label it as such, because to label it as such, they have to be more, a little more cognizant of it and make sure the mashgiach, whoever's working, is not eating a sandwich or washes his hands after he ate a sandwich, Okay. Footnote 113. We're going to be moving to some of the footnotes a bit because it's quite expansive. So if you look at the back of the booklet, you'll see footnote 113. Okay, so this comes from Talmud Yerushalmi Psachim 10:1, which states that any wine that's kosher for Kiddush is kosher for the 4 cups. This includes, he continues, grape juice. Even though he kept on saying wine, but because now he introduces this idea that it's the same thing as your Kiddush wine, so if there you can use grape juice, you can use grape juice here too. And that's what he's citing to here. This is evident from the Alter Rebbe's ruling in section 272. 272 is the laws of the wine used for Kiddush. We learned some of it. You might remember a while back, we learned about whether you can use mashke for Kiddush. That came from the laws in 272. And there he says, indicates that grape juice is allowed, so therefore the same thing would apply for the 4 cups of wine. Indeed, continues the footnote, as related in Oitzer Menhage Chabad Nisan, page 139. Oitzer Menhage Chabad is a book written by Rabbi Yeshua Munshan of blessed memory. My father has his books downstairs by his place, davening. And he collects all kinds of customs of Chabad from different sources, from people who watched the Rebbe practice or from people who watched previous Chabad Rebbe's practice. So there he writes that when they did not have wine that met their standards of kashrus, both the Rebbe Rayat, the previous Rebbe, and the Rebbe used grape juice at the Siddharim. I guess during the war or wherever the situation was, the only wine available was wine that was kosher, but maybe not the level that they hoped for. So they would use grape juice instead. Yeah, may with me. See, however, the Rebbe's Igrish Kodesh, volume 19, letter number 7219, where he writes that grape juice should be made by boiling grapes rather than squeezing them. This advice is given to a person whose doctors cautioned him against drinking wine. We have to look that up to see what that's about. Let's see if volume 19 is here. Where did the Igris go? Wasn't there an Igris here? Right here it is, yeah. Okay, so Igris 19, letter number 7219. So that would be 219 would be Reish Yotes. Let's see if there's a reason. Okay. It's a Yiddish letter which reads, after a long period of time, I finally received your letter from Tuesday with that which accompanied the letter. God willing, I will again make mention of you pray at the resting place of my father-in-law in accordance with what you tell me in your letter. In response to your question, with respect to the 4 cups of wine, when you speak to your doctor, he will probably allow you to make juice using boiled grapes. And ask him if it's better to have with sugar or without sugar. Ask your doctor. Other juices don't come into the consideration at all to be used for 4 cups of wine. I guess not to use or apple juice or orange juice. And with respect to the medicines you're asking, talk to your doctor. It doesn't give a reason why boiled grapes as opposed to squeezed grapes. I don't know. It's a good question.
I also don't understand the with without sugar. I mean,
no, that's just a medical thing.
Okay.
I was telling him you're just ask your doctor if better with sugar or without sugar. Oh, maybe it's actually relevant because before he mentioned, where did he mention it? He mentioned in the previous halacha. He mentioned something about sugar, right? Remember, he once mentioned something about sugar, didn't he? Where did we read about sugar? We read about sugar yesterday. Maybe in the previous service letter. Oh, the Rabbi Shab said, "I want wine without sugar."
Okay.
Here they was telling him whichever one the doctor says is better, with or without sugar.
And by without sugar, they mean dry wine.
Sorry?
You think by without sugar, they mean dry?
I suppose.
Right. Like dry wine instead of sweet wine?
I suppose. Okay, so continuing footnote 13. So the Rebbe gives this advice to someone to drink grape juice for the 4 cups using boiled grapes. See, they add here rather than squeezing them. It's not as if the Rebbe said don't squeeze the grapes. It's just that when they were told them to drink grape juice, they were told to make the grape juice by boiling it, which you read into that as opposed to squeezing, I suppose. Okay, as mentioned in notes to section 272, mentioned above, generally, the Rebbe would be careful to use wine and not grape juice for Kiddush. Generally speaking, they only used the grape juice when there was no kosher available, when there was no wine available at the level of kosher that they wanted. In particular, with regard to Pesach, wine is preferred because it encourages the mode of freedom and leisure that must categorize one's conduct at the Seder. Yep. Okay, continuing. So back to the main text of the halacha, right? So we said that any wine that's kosher for the Kiddush is kosher for the 4 cups. Going, for example, yain mavushal, cooked wine. Yeah, let's go to footnote 114. Good morning, Alan Nash. Just joined us on the Zoom.
Wow.
Very exciting to have you on here. Okay, footnote 114, yeah? Go to the back, back of the booklet.
Don't get too excited. Eh? Don't get too excited.
I'm very excited. Footnote 114. So the factor is relevant today that you can use boiled wine because many commercially produced wines are pasteurized, which are Moshe Feinstein in Igis Moshe Volume 2, 152, and many others considered as boiled, right? Pasteurized wine being boiled. See section 272.9, where the author writes, quote, wine that was boiled, by contrast, is disqualified as a libation for the altar, only because it has been changed from its natural state, which is an important factor.
That's mavushal.
That's correct. Oftentimes, when we talk about what's considered a good wine, we talk about the kind of wine that's kosher for libations in the altar in the temple. This is especially relevant, actually, when it comes to yayin nesach, right? You're not allowed to enjoy of anything that might be used for idol worship. So wine is used, actually till today, in churches for libation, right? So there's a concern that this wine that the non-Jew is handling or used or drank from may have been used for idolatrous libation. Now the rule is that we're only concerned with the same kind of wine that's kosher on the altar. So if a wine cannot be used on our altar in the Mizbeach in the temple, then it's not disqualified when a guy uses it. Only the kind of wine that would have been kosher on the altar is the kind of wine we're worried about that might have been used for idol worship. And because mavushal wine, cooked wine, is not qualified to be poured as libation on the altar in the temple, therefore when a guy handles mavushal wine, you can drink it. That's where the mavushal thing comes from, right? But nonetheless, it's still kosher for Kiddush, even though it would not be kosher for the altar in the Mizbeach.
Right.
Clear? Yeah.
It does sound like, though, that, like, let's say there's non-kosher wine in the SAQ, for example, then as long as it hasn't been used in a church, then it's kosher.
What's that? Non-kosher. Okay, well, the two separate prohibitions. Just because there happens to be two prohibitions on one wine doesn't mean it, right? Okay. One is kosher food. Now, even kosher food, you have to be careful it's not libation.
Right.
In other words, the issue of libation is not the only concern with wine.
Right.
Right? Okay.
Just like you can have kosher meat and kosher cheese. So,
exactly. Okay.
Right.
So, says the Alter Rebbe, why is it that kosher, that boiled wine, even though it's in the footnote 114, right? Even though it is forbidden to be used on the altar, nonetheless, it's allowed to be used for Kiddush, he explains. Again, wine that was boiled, by contrast, is disqualified as libation for the altar, Mizbeach, only because it has been changed from its natural state. Because it's been boiled, and you have to use natural, fresh wine for the Mizbeach, yes? Are you with me or no? With me, Mayor, or no?
I think so.
What are we missing?
Disqualified, where did you leave off?
But put footnote 114.
Yeah.
Wine that was boiled, by contrast, is disqualified as libation for the altar because it has been changed from its natural state, yes?
Yes.
Good. Nevertheless, it has been changed positively, not adversely, as stated in section 204.6. They pasteurize it, they boil it to keep it fresher for longer.
Okay. That's considered positive.
That's right. Even though if you're a feinschmecker, you might say it doesn't taste as good. Right? But they do this because it actually lasts longer, because it's longer shelf life. Therefore, continues the Alter Rebbe, these authorities maintain it may be used for Kiddush, and therefore may be used also for 4 cups of wine. Needless to say, this also applies to wine to which honey was added. We're going to talk about that in a second. For it is not inherently disqualified as a libation for the altar. It is disqualified only because of the honey. As it is written, you shall offer no leaven or honey on a fire as offering. The Torah says no honey in the Mizbeach. So when you pour honey into wine, it's not that the wine became disqualified. It's that you're also pouring honey. So what is prohibiting you from pouring the wine mixed with honey on the altar? It's because the wine is bad? No, the wine actually might be better tasting now that you added honey. The only reason why it's disqualified is because there's a separate prohibition that you're not allowed to pour honey down, not because the wine became worse. And therefore you could use that wine for Kiddush.
Right.
Okay. Fundamentally, the halacha follows this view, and it's customary to recite Kiddush over such wine that's either cooked, mavushal, or with honey. Even if one has other wine, but it's not the same quality as this wine. So if I have a wine that's a sweet wine mixed with honey, that is a better quality than the wine that's pure and not boiled, take the one with the honey, even though it's not as pure.
And this goes against what we said earlier, that if we have 2 wines, we should prefer the better wine.
Why? It's exactly what you just said. He said even if you have one honey and one that's not honey, if the one that's honey is of better quality, use the honey. Which is exactly the point, right? Meaning you have, right? Okay. Don't assume because it doesn't have honey, it's a better wine.
Okay, right. Doesn't
necessarily mean so. It could be a worse wine, right? Again, we have commercially produced wine. So when you buy your wine, you know what you're getting. And you're buying one that you like. That's not the way it was. You can go to the store and get a standardized bottle of wine. It's a luck of the draw. The wine could be better, it could be worse. And if that year's yield of grapes was bad, then everybody in town had bad wine. And this wine, because I added honey, tastes better, so I'm gonna take that one. Right? And it could be I add my honey myself.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Because the wine locally wasn't good, so I added honey to make it better.
Right.
Today, no one does that because, again, we have standardized, commercially produced wine.
But here, and they're saying that the wine would be added post-production. You're saying like
maybe in my house, maybe even I buy the wine from the store, I take a drink, and I'm like, oh man, this year's harvest was horrible. Let's add some honey and make it drinkable. Right. Okay.
And is this around the same time that they would also have chai?
This is later, but still, but it's certainly a possibility. Okay, the factor of boiled wine, continues the footnote, is particularly relevant when there are people joining the Pesach Seder who presently do not observe the Shabbos, or if there's a non-Jewish waiter serving the wine, etc.
Maybe.
Is what we said before, that any wine that's not valid on the altar also is not a concern that it might be used for libation for idol worship, and therefore, because boiled wine is not valid on the altar, therefore, even if a goy handles it, it's still kosher. So if you are having a big public seder and you have non-Jews present, actually better to use the boiled wine, right? So when such people handle wine, there are authorities who rule that the wine should be disqualified. See section 385, see also section 55, and so on, after the parentheses. Nevertheless, the stringency does not apply once wine is boiled. Meaning, once wine is boiled, we no longer are concerned with yayin nesach, with libation wine, as mentioned in Shulchan Aruch of Rav Yosef Karo Yeridea 123:2. Okay, good. Back to the main text of Halacha 27. So we said you're allowed to use wine. Any wine that's used for kiddush can be used for 4 cups, including mavoshol and konditoin. The konditoin, you see that word?
Yeah.
What's konditoin? Dahainu yain shema arvin by dvasha pilpulin. Water, wine that has been spiced. So they added some sort of spice to it, or they added honey. Do you want to make it sweeter? Or you want to make it spicier, whichever one. Yeah. Even in the first instance, it's not as if using these wines are a second best option. To begin with, you can choose these wines. If you have no other wine that's as good. So you have the pure wine without any flavoring that's not of a good quality. The wine that has honey as a better quality, use the honey. Right? Commission is Barbisim Reish Ayin Beis is explained in chapter 272. Likewise, Mei Shriya Simukim, wine that's made by soaking raisins. Ksherim are kosher, ladal kosher is for the 4 cups of wine. It's grape juice, basically. But it's grape juice that, well, actually wine also. If it's fermented, it could be wine, not just grape juice. It could be wine too. If they meet the standards that would make it kosher for kiddush, so what's the standard to make sure that water soaked in raisins is kosher for kiddush? If the raisins still retain enough liquid that if I were to squeeze them, liquid would come out, then I could use that to soak and make wine out of. Wow. If it can't do that, if the raisins are so dry that it won't produce any liquid before I soak them, then that cannot be used to become your wine. Therefore, if one has taken a vow he's not going to drink wine, say God forbid a recovering alcoholic who cannot drink wine. So Yikach Metzimukam Nabakosis, he can take no, actually it's not correct. The alcoholic should use grape juice. This is actually wine. This is actually alcoholic. But because the person took a vow against drinking wine, that prohibition will only go to normal wine. Whereas wine that's made out of soaked grape raisins, is not under the rubric of his vow, and therefore he'd be allowed to drink it. Yeah, I'll look in footnote 116. Interesting footnote. See section 272.7 and section 202.12, reading footnote 116, which describe the process of making raisin wine at length. In previous generations in Russia, wine made from fresh grapes was rare. Wine is not produced there.
Right.
So how do you import grapes from the Middle East? They dry out by the time they get there, i.e. raisins. Right? So if you're living deep in Russia land, the wine you're going to get is often from raisins. Right? So wine made from fresh grapes was rare, and many Jews used wine made from raisins. And interestingly enough, my wife's grandfather, who passed away during COVID, at the age of 96, used to make wine, his own fresh wine from his raisins. Until his late 90s. After he was 90 years old, he was still doing it.
Wow.
Making wine from.
Did you ever try it?
I did. When we spent after we got married, we spent Shabbos in his house in London, and he, at 91 or 2 years old, made dinner for us, including some of his wine. Yeah. Very
Even in
special man.
London, not Australia.
No, London, yeah.
Wow.
The stories from that time. My second youngest, Heshka, is named after him.
Right.
Okay. One more halacha. Yeah, halacha chavches. Likewise, a place where wine is not available, like we just said. Mitzvah, the best and optimal way to do the mitzvah is likach meitzimukim, to take wine produced from raisins, right? This we just learned about in Russia. Havel, but meikir adin. So that was the best halach. That's the best case scenario. But meikir adin, following the letter of the law, in areas where wine is not easily available. What qualifies as a place where wine is not easily available? Everything we're about to read now doesn't apply today, because today you can click a button and get wine shipped from anywhere.
Right.
But in the old days, it didn't exist. So what qualifies as an area in which wine is not available? Tahainu, this is shemahalich yoim echad svivos ha'ir, within a walking distance of 1 day around the city, in gadol sham yayin, no wine grows. Harbe a lot. Elamat is there only little. So if within a day's walk, there's only a little guy's got a little vineyard making a little bit of wine. Right? So then, I may. So the best case scenario would actually get a hold of raisins, which you could import at a longer distance, because it won't become not fresh because it's raisins, and make wine out of that. But by the letter of the law, because wine's not available to me easily, because it's not in a walking distance, right, of a day's walk, so I can take shar mashkim shem chamar medina, other drinks that are the wine of the region, something we discussed when we were talking about mashke. So what are the kinds of wines, essentially, what are the kinds of drinks that are of a special standing enough that you'd invite someone over to have it? Right? Or did you invite someone of repute? You wouldn't do that to have a glass of orange juice.
Right.
But to have a tea, you might. Right. To have a beer, you might. To have a glass of whiskey, you might. Right? Because those are more prestigious drinks.
Sure.
Right? So let's look at footnote 117. Yeah, look at footnote 117. We actually have it there, footnote 117, to describe what exactly is footnote 117. What exactly is Chamar Medina? What exactly is the wine of the region? So see section 272, halacha 10 and 11. Okay, we actually learned those when we learned the Gemara, because the Gemara discussed this and we learned them. And you can look up with a video of YouTube where we go through those two halachas. And Kuntas Acharon is the Alter Rebbe's notes to his own code.
In the Tanya, or?
No, Kuntas Acharon means like an appendix. So in Tanya it's an appendix there, and Shulchan Aruch it's an appendix there. Okay, so see section 272, 10, 11, and the Kuntas Acharon note 1 to that section, which discusses the concept of Chamar Medina, wine of the region, at length. In that source, the Alter Rebbe rules that even if wine is easily available in stores, since it is not the beverage used by the majority of people of that locale on a regular basis, other important beverages can be considered as Chamar Medina and are acceptable for Kiddush. So let's say you're living in a little town in Russia, right? Wine is available. There's someone who sells wine there. It's super expensive. So most people, when they have friends over for dinner, aren't serving wine. They're serving vodka, because you're in the middle of Russia. And potato is available, so you're making vodka out of potato. So even in that case, although wine is available, you can still use the potato vodka for Kiddush, because it's Chamar Medina, it's the wine of the region. It's the prestigious drink of the region. Okay. So as he continues, at present, when advances in transportation have made geographic distances less significant, it is questionable to what extent this principle currently applies, which is what we learned when we discussed that then, the real serious questionability of using mashke for Kiddush. Because the reliance of mashke for Kiddush is reliant on this principle of Chamar Medina, relying on the wine of the region. But today, can you actually say that the wine of the region here is whiskey? Even though maybe within a walking distance of Montreal, there is no wine being produced, which there is actually, because you can have day walk to upstate New York and there's wine being made there. But let's say there wasn't. We have wine everywhere available for cheap. In fact, cheaper than the whiskey, right? So to rely on this permissibility is somewhat questionable.
Wow.
But nonetheless, indeed, continues the footnote, in practically all major Jewish communities, wine is readily available at reasonable prices. And the concept of Chamar Medina, the wine of the region, almost doesn't apply. Nevertheless, if kosher wine is hardly available, ever available in an entire region, it is reasonable to assume that other beverages are considered the wine of the region and may be used. So if you're traveling and you happen to be on an island somewhere in the Caribbean and there's no wine available to you, you can get whiskey from the bar and make kiddush. Right? Because there's no wine available.
But that's like a bit of a bold statement, though. Because let's say you're in your house and you don't have wine left, but you have tea, coffee, whatever, beer.
Go to your neighbor.
Yeah, it's still saying that.
Go to your neighbor.
Yeah, go out and
Make
get
kiddush and shul.
easily available.
Yeah, make kiddush and shul.
Right.
Or go to your neighbor's house.
Right. So it's
Okay.
not so applicable then today.
Okay, again, we did a video I did share on these halachas 10, 11. But let's continue back to the main text, and then we'll conclude this halacha and we'll finish with that.
Wow.
Every Shabbos and Yom Tov, we get a knock on our door from the neighbor. Do you have any candles? Do you have any wine?
Wonderful.
But I usually give them some chicken soup at the same time.
Exactly. Throwing a challah for free. Okay,
Free.
so back to the main halacha, which is, in best case scenario, you're getting raisins and turning it into wine. But if you're in a place where wine is not available in a day's walk, so then you may take, you may use wine of the region for your 4 cups of wine, because again, you're in a place where wine's not available easily. So what would be wine of the region, at least in the Alter Rebbe's time? Could go and make vash. For example, he calls it here water honey, or honey flavored water. He's talking about mead. Mead is a kind of alcoholic beverage that's made from honey. In places where it's okay to drink it on Pesach, and they're not concerned with flour being mixed into this mead, into this alcoholic beverage, right? You have a very serious concern with hard alcohol, much of which is made of grain, right? So if it's, let's say, like they have the slivovitz with prune, so you can use that for your 4 cups of wine if, again, wine is not available. We should just know that in Chabad, our custom is not to have any hard alcohol at all on Pesach, even if it's kosher for Passover. Sorry? Yeah, that's the Chabad. The Tzemach Tzedek writes this. Chabad minhag is not to have any hard alcohol on Pesach, even if it's kosher Passover. Even if it's made of prune or potatoes or whatnot, or orange peels, as my great-grandmother used to do. My grandmother, Toki's mother, used to make hard alcohol out of orange peels. Yeah. So, but the Chabad custom is not to drink it anyway. But again, this wine's not available because you're stuck in some town in Russia. Okay.
Maybe.
You Pesach.
You hear me?
It's the Chabad custom. I don't have to stop anybody else from doing it. It's the Chabad custom not to have hard alcohol on Pesach. Many do. Alan, what do you want to say?
I was going to say, I don't understand how wine can compare to, how grapes can compare to raisins.
There is such a thing. You can make wine out of raisins.
I've never seen a raisin that's juicy.
Today you buy dried out raisins, but it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be so dried out. I mentioned before, my wife's grandfather used to make wine out of.
I remember you said that.
Yeah. Okay, now it continues. Even though it's true that when it comes to Kiddush on other Yom holidays, Shabbos and Shabbos, it's better to use bread than to use other alcoholic beverages. Even if it's the wine of the region, as explained in chapter 272, which we also learned then. Basically, this is the hierarchy of choice: wine, bread for Kiddush, and then Chamar Medina. Right?
Wow.
We learned this at length when we learned chapter 272, halachas 10 and 11.
But you can use bread for Havdalah, can you?
No, it's only for Kiddush specifically.
Right.
But on the night of Pesach, you can't make Kiddush on bread. Why?
Pesach.
Why? Okay, matzah. Make Kiddush on matzah,
Right.
which is the bread of the night.
Yeah.
Why can't you make Kiddush on that bread on matzah?
You're not supposed to eat it.
More importantly, in addition to making Kiddush, you have another obligation here, which is to drink 4 cups of wine. So maybe you can cover Kiddush by making it on matzah,
Right.
but you wouldn't cover your 4 cups of wine.
Right.
So for that purpose, the hierarchy on the Seder night would be
Switch.
wine and then Chamar Medina. Yeah. So Pesach, on the night of the Seder, one cannot make Kiddush on bread, meaning on matzah bread. Because you're obligated to drink 4 cups of wine. And we looked above at the 4 cups of wine have to be done in order, and that each cup you recite another element of the Seder on. And the first of the four, who koshel kiddush, is the cup of kiddush. The second one being a cup over the Haggadah, the third one being a cup over benching, and the fourth one being a cup over Hallel. So in addition to the recitation of kiddush, which in theory could be done on bread, like it's done all year round, and let's say at your Yom Tov day meal on Pesach in the day, if you had a limited amount of wine, or for whatever reason you can't drink wine, make kiddush on matzah. But by the Seder, you can't do that, because in addition to your recitation of Kiddush, you have an obligation to consume 4 cups. And that you can't do with your matzah bread.
But Yom Tov day, you can.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll continue tomorrow. Some more qualifiers. One more qualifier about the type of drink, right? So where he's going to say that, let's say, apple juice is not allowed. We'll talk about that. And then we're going to get into more details on everybody, the need, the primacy, the importance of drinking 4 cups of wine, even if someone is so poor that he's collecting tzedakah. And then finally, we'll get to the last halacha, which is what we talked about way at the beginning from our Gemara, giving out nuts to the children to keep them engaged. So that is coming tomorrow, God willing. A wonderful day, Eden. Alan, stay on for a second. I'm going to stop the recording.